swag vibe, baby.
Welcome to the Cup of Joe Show, where we explore the journey of recovery from alcohol and drug addiction. One story, one conversation, and one step at a time. I'm your host, Joe, creating a safe space for honest discussions about the challenges and triumphs of addiction and alcoholism. In each episode, we'll hear inspiring stories and uncover tools that make healing possible. Sobriety is not a one-size-fits-all journey, and you don't have to face it alone. Recovery is possible, and it's worth it. Thank you for joining the Cup of Joe Show. Now let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Cup of Joe Show. I'm your host, of course, Joe. And today I'm happy to have my guest is Scott M. He began his strongest chapter in recovery on February 27th, 2023, after 12 years of some relapses and 3 incredibly dark years at the bottom. Scott is now walking a new path, one rooted in honesty, healing, and hope. From LSD to meth and always an alcoholic at heart, his story is one of transformation through perseverance and grace. Scott is recently engaged and shares his life with 2 dogs, Zoe the Black Lab, and Ladybug the Brussels Griffin. And of course, there's Daryl, the ever mysterious cat. A creative at heart, he finds peace and purpose in playing guitar, writing songs, woodworking, skateboarding, and some time at the range. Scott's story reminds us that it's never too late to come back, and that even the hardest journeys can lead to beautiful new beginnings. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's get into it. How you doing today, Scott?
Man, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great, brother. Thank you so much for joining me today. So tell me, what was it like growing up, Scott?
Well, it depends how far you want to go back here. It's, all I remember, from the first memory I had was, I think it was like in kindergarten or something like that. And I just remember my mom dropping me off and just, I didn't know what to do, man. I didn't know how to act. I felt really strange, really out of place. I think I might have even cried, to get the hell out of there. But, that's just what I remember. And, from there, it kind of went on, up through, middle school or something, so, I mean, it was just a situation where I just, didn't know how to act, never really felt like I fit in, just like an outsider all the time. And, the earliest, I guess, break from that I can remember is when I was 14, I got a skateboard. And when I got a skateboard, that was my outlet. That was where I felt free. That was something I could go to, and I didn't have to be anyone but myself. And I happened to get pretty good at it. I wasn't good at the start, just like anything, it had to develop, but after it developed, it was something I loved to do, man. Just absolutely loved it. And, kind of growing up from there, I learned to play guitar, and that was another great outlet, and music ended up saving my life. Several different things that happened all through, my childhood and everything. But, I grew up with a real good family. My dad and mom were great people. They did anything for me and my sisters. I'm the middle child, and, they did everything. They supported us, with everything. We never talked politics, which is, I'm finding is kind of different than, how other families grew up, but we never discussed politics. My dad was Jewish, my mom Christian. So there was a little bit of a question mark when it came to, religion. I never really saw any kind of organized religion as one that fit me, because I didn't know if I was Jewish. I didn't know if I was Christian. I didn't know what I was, So it was like one of those things where, man, I somewhat struggled in it a lot. I talked a lot with my mom about that, and she was, a devout Christian, and, really talked about God all the time. And, I pulled a lot of, where I stand today from, more from her. My dad never really talked about Judaism. I never really made it into a temple or anything like that. I, always went to church. My mom put me in the choir, so I was in the choir. I was a choir boy, right? And I guess that was my start in music, and that was really, really young. But, apparently we have music in our background, or, in my family background. My grandfather was a harmonica player, and he used to get up, when when they'd go out to dinner, he'd get up and he'd, play with the band. And I thought that was pretty damn cool. So, with music, I started writing. I had bands I had a band in high school, and we started writing our own music. We played gigs around Atlanta, and then same with college. Got made, demo tapes and recordings, and it was just really cool, and and that's pretty much it. I found drugs and alcohol when I was 15. My first thing was LSD. I had LSD before I even drank. And when I first did it, I was absolutely amazed with it. It's something that, really took me. It happened, that thing that we're used to or the thing that happens to us when we first take a drink or first take a drug, it happened to me. And I wanted to be like that the rest of my life. I wanted to do that every single day of my existence. And it was just something that I chased every day. And that became the most important thing to me because I loved the way it felt. It was amazing. It was awesome. Absolutely incredible. So
I always look back at that one high school, especially like when you were telling them about how you just didn't feel comfortable, but you're finding outlets, like skateboarding and guitar but like alcohol and drugs for me was like the great equalizer. It was like I didn't have to do anything, and I was like, as long as I was drinking or drugging, I was like, I fit in, so I get that. What was your family's I guess what was like your impression of like drinking and drugs prior to that? Was there anything in your family about, with that?
Well, my dad, he drank a little bit. He'd stop at 2. He'd drink scotch and water and stop at 2. I don't know how. I look back and I'm like, how? I don't even understand that. But my mom would have a couple glasses of wine. I never really said I would never do it. I looked at when, God, I think like in middle school or something. During the whole Nancy Reagan, say no to drugs. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe I should say no to drugs. But I didn't really take it serious. They came in with this big board and they had all these, different types of drugs up there, and they, name them. And it was 2 cops that did it, I think. And I just, I was kind of bored with it. I didn't really pay attention. I really didn't have too much thought, about it. I do have in my family, I've got a whole line of alcoholics on both sides. But I never knew it would be something that could pass down. I never thought that it would be something I'd be dealing with. And I never even thought it would be something I'd be dealing with all throughout addiction. I never saw myself as an addict or an alcoholic my entire career of 33 years of drinking and drugging. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just amazing. But, like with LSD, I love that. And, I did that all through high school. I started drinking. I started drinking like, I don't know, maybe a couple months into LSD. And I thought that was absolutely amazing too. I found that I could go to parties and I could be, whoever I wanted to be. And I didn't care. It's like I just fit in, man. It was just, like you said, man, it was like great equalizer. It was just like, man, this is something I can do, and I don't have to worry anymore. I feel comfortable in my own skin. I'm not restless, irritable, and discontent, as they say, and that's a feeling I could never stand. I think, back in middle school, I think that was probably my coolest that I was, just when I was skateboarding, you know what I mean? Which is, somewhat pathetic, I guess, you know what I mean? But I didn't find drugs. I didn't find alcohol. And throughout my, whole career in drugs and alcohol, I was always thinking about, man, it was just so great back in middle school, the introductions to, parties in the basements of, your fellow classmates, and how just amazing that was, all these girls, and the first time, just, hooking up, and, first girlfriends. And, I was just like, man, that was like really the height. And I was skateboarding all the time. And it seemed like just such a great thing that when I really got into drugs and everything in high school, I always wanted to kind of get back to that feeling. And I never really thought that, drugs and alcohol was really taking it away from me. I was just like, well, maybe I can just, act like that or something, man. because the high school I went to was real. It was a place called Walton High School in East Cobb. And, it was a lot of rich kids and really affluent area. My parents were never rich. I mean, shoot, my mom made clothes for us back in like elementary school. And, people were driving up in, these BMWs that were brand new, Mercedes that were brand new, these, exotic cars, they were all brand new. And I was just like, man, and the big push was to be a football player and, have the cheerleaders and all this. And, I was 5'5" and weighed, 100 pounds. That's just not going to happen for me. I started wrestling in high school, which was pretty cool. That was my stint in being a, somewhat of a, I guess, jock or whatever, but, the jocks ruled that school, and, skater punks would get their asses kicked. So, same with musicians and same with freaks, we were all kind of in the same line, but those were my people, those were, I kind of gravitated towards those people. I don't know how, it's just like when, it was just like an attraction, that happened with them. And it was just one of those things where, man, I just really fit in with that type of crowd, the type of crowd that did a lot of drugs, did a lot of smoking pot, that did a lot of LSD, that did a lot of drinking. And those were, more or less my crowd. It was never the jocks and, anything like that, because I always thought that, these guys are just going exactly how their parents want them to be, and I wanted to do something else. I wanted to kind of carve in my own life, and carve in my own, just, be my own self, especially when I got into music, because I never really learned a lot of covers. I just kind of learned to play and just play things and just kind of noodle around until something cool came out. And, that's kind of how I play even today. It's just great, and music was a big thing for me. Even listening to, I would listen to like a lot of Metallica, like Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, Garage Days, Kill 'Em All. And I really love those. I'd be mowing someone's yard and I'd have the old headphones on, with the cassette player. You know what I'm talking about? People probably don't know what I'm talking about, but, I had those on, and, I made a little bit of money, a little bit of extra money mowing, my neighbors' yards and my yard, and, landscaping became a thing because I realized, oh my God, I can make some money, and then I can buy some LSD, and I can buy some drugs, and I can do this thing every day, man. This is awesome, and, a lot of my childhood was like that. It was wrapped around that, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, did you have any consequences back then? I mean, do you have any like pause moments where like, maybe you had a little too much fun or anything, or?
No real consequences back then. Nothing really happened, to me consequence wise until much later. I would get into situations where like, man, I'm doing this too much. It's just, it's really getting to my, I just think this may not be normal doing this every day and doing this every day for a long time. But it came, I might think that like when I'm tripping on acid towards the end of it, as I'm, coming down, I'm thinking that, but then, the next day I'm like, wow, where is that stuff again? I don't know what, and that any bit of like my thoughts when I was loaded or, the crash coming down, they never appeared, It's like we cannot bring into the forefront of our minds, all that bad stuff that happens, when we're about to use again or when we're about to drink again. And that was, one of those things where it just kind of went over and over and over. I found that basically all through high school, it was just really about drinking, smoking pot, and doing LSD. Now I did have a little bit of a consequence when I was 15. When I was 15, I went to rehab. So, but I never saw it as a thing. One of my friends went to rehab. He was the best friend of mine. And, my parents jumped in. They were like, well, we should get him assessed. And when you're a kid getting, assessed in the 80s, you're going to rehab no matter what you say. It just felt like that. But I was honest with them. I was dumb enough to be honest. And they were like, well, what drugs have you done? How often do you do them? I'm like, yeah, every day. And they were like, well, would you ever do, something like heroin? And I was like, yeah, I might try that. I might try that. Well, you don't say that when you're 15, to doctors that are trying to figure out if you're an addict or an alcoholic. That's just something you don't say. And I didn't even think about it. I thought I was just going to come in for 10 minutes, have a discussion, and leave. I was 15. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This was in the skateboarding days. So it's, I didn't need it. I just didn't need rehab. And, I went for about 5 weeks. And, after that, I got out and, immediately started smoking cigarettes again. I was a smoker. And, within 3 weeks, I was drinking, at my, I think, where was it? I just remember drinking with some friends and just being like, yeah, man, they brainwash you in there. Just like, the whole thought was. And, immediately back to smoking pot. But it was that, at that point in time where I did feel some guilt. And, I couldn't trip on acid anymore because that was my drug of choice back then. And when I tried it, I just feel this extreme amount of guilt. Like I was letting people down. Like I was letting my parents down. Like I was letting my little nephew down that thought I was really cool. And consequences were more in my mind. And, in terms of getting, arrested or anything like that, I saw a bunch of my friends get arrested, but they were breaking into, liquor stores and they were doing all this kind of crap when I would just go out and I'd work for my money and I'd spend it on drugs. I didn't really need to do that. But in terms of like getting arrested, anything like that, dealing with the law, being on probation, nothing like that really happened, so it was, I didn't really face any consequences until my first DUI that I got, back, I think it was 2009. So, that's a big span of time. You're talking, from 92 to 2009, you're talking 10 years and a lot happened in those 10 years. When I went to college, that's when I started getting in. I had my own landscaping company by then, and I had several different accounts, a lot of them in Midtown. And it was one of those things where my dad, he had gotten to be well off, he had made a lot of money and he had promised himself to, put his kids through college because he never went to college. His sister did, they had enough money for her, the older sister, but they didn't have enough money for him. So he had to put himself through college. My dad always busted his ass. So he made it to a point where, he was going to put me through school. I chose a, one in-state. So it was a lot less expensive, but even so, he completely floated the bill. And the landscaping company I own, I remember I made, I think it was like $750 a week and it was all cash. And I thought that was just so much money. And it probably was, if you're looking at back in, 1994, that probably was a ton of money. And, I got into cocaine then. And, when I got into cocaine, I didn't, by that time I wasn't doing any acid. I was drinking a lot and, drinking every single night, never really drinking during the day. But, going to school and, I just all through college, that's drinking was really where it was. And cocaine came into play. And that's, towards my last 2 years in college, I decided that, I had always wanted to be a famous rock star, right, by this time. And I had been playing a lot, recording with a couple bands and, recorded with a band in college. And I thought we were pretty damn good. You ever heard of that band Drive By Truckers? You ever heard of them? So their drummer is the same drummer that I used to play with back in the day, which was really cool. But we had a good band. We were writing a lot of cool music. And, so I decided I was going to run away from this cocaine habit. And I decided to move out to Los Angeles, which is probably not very smart. You're moving out to like the drug mecca of the world, but I moved out there, took a month to get out there, and I was running away from the cocaine habit. But me and my buddy that I had, learned guitar with had always wanted to, move to California and try out our, just go chase down our big dreams. I never wanted to be a corporate dude. I never wanted to have to sit in a desk, and I didn't want to get my hands dirty either doing landscaping. So, I was determined that I was going to be famous, man. I was going to be a rock star, and that's just, what was in my head. So moved out to California. Me and my buddy took a month to get out there because we were driving by every national and state park, and he wasn't really a drinker. He wasn't a drinker at all. But I remember having, a 6-pack or a 12-pack of beer in there every single night. Didn't have the cocaine or anything like that because I was starting a new life. And, we went to all the national and state parks all the way up through, Colorado. Oh, wait, when we hit Kansas, we went to a strip club because I like those a lot. And there was a girl there that I, really kind of, fell for, and so I convinced her to come along with us. And, my buddy didn't like that too much. In fact, he was pissed at me. He was really, really mad at me because I, basically broke up the, relationship with him to have it with this girl, and, picked her up. And then, so we're still going through all these national and state parks, like in Utah. We made it to Vegas. And when we made it to Vegas, a friend of mine had just moved out there. So we decided to stop and get, jobs there. I got a job as a, in construction because I'd worked in construction a little bit previous to that and doing framing. And that's when I told the girl that, we're not going to advance together, that, she needs to go back to Kansas. And I flew, bought her a ticket, flew her back there. Didn't even think about any kind of, consequences she might have or whatever, thought with her. I just figured, she needed to go and it was time for her to go. So it was time for us to split up. And that's kind of what happened there. But we made it out to Los Angeles and, needless to say, I didn't make it as a rock star. I know that's kind of surprising, kind of shocking, but, out in LA, it's a totally different thing. I remember getting out there. On the way out there, I remember one particular time, actually, we were in, I can't remember where it was. We were heading to a place called Turoweep. And Turoweep is this really cool canyon that's, where where both of the Colorado River it splits. And then it comes back together. And when it came back together, up in this huge, place that, was kind of like a V, there's this huge campground, and we were the only ones out there. But on the way there, we had stopped at a gas station to get beer because, I was driving out and I was like, oh, wait, my tire is, has a hole in it, Joey. We got to get back and we got to fill it up. So the only reason I told him that was because I didn't have any beer and I was just going to be devastated without any beer. I knew I was. So I remember specifically, turning back around, going to a gas station. We went ahead and gassed up, and the weirdest thing happened there. As I was gassing up, as I was going in to get the beer, this guy pulled up and he's talking to Joey. And, Joey knows him somehow. I don't know. And we're all the way out in Arizona or Utah or somewhere where, the Grand Canyon is. I can't remember what state we are. Anyway, so I walk up to him, I was kind of interested to see. And the guy looked at me, he goes, "Is your name Scott?" And I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Man, I'm Brad. I played didgeridoo while you were jamming in guitar one time." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I remember you." Well, turns out he had 2 other girls. I still had the girl, that I had brought, and they were going to a place called Turoweep. So we all went together. We all hung out. We all hiked down, to the Colorado River. And it was an amazing, real special thing. But anyway, so, after that, after all the national and state parks, we made it out to California. And I thought it was just the coolest thing. Los Angeles was just the coolest thing. Now, he had planned, and he was a planner. So he had planned all these, national and state parks that we were going through. We had a Golden Eagle pass. We could go, not pay anything. I had a van. We could sleep in the van. It was all built out and everything. It was just a really cool thing. But when we got out to LA, I didn't know where I was going to stay. He had already had, a house lined up and roommates lined up and, did things the correct way. I didn't. I just basically ended up in a hotel and a real creepy, just bottom of the line hotel on Santa Monica and Cahuenga Boulevards. It was just nasty, man. It was just absolutely disgusting. Anyway, I found a job at a guitar center, and this time my drinking really picked up. I was getting people that were commenting on it, like Joey. I'd go over to his house, like where he was staying, and they were all like, one time they were like, "Yeah, we've got a keg of beer. We know Scott will drink it." And I was drinking every single night. I wouldn't drink it during the day, but I was drinking every single night. And the drugs I would do. anyway, so, long story short, I ended up moving into the house with him after about 2 months. He stayed in the garage. He just didn't ever have a job. The guy's crazy, but he literally stayed in the garage this whole time. And, I got one of the rooms, and it just so happens that one of the girls that lived there, her name was Brandy Roderick. And I don't mean to, mention her name or anything, but I think it's important here. Her name was Brandy Roderick. She'd go out, and she was a gold digger, and she'd say it. She said that she was a gold digger, so everything was all right. Goes out one night and meets Hugh Hefner and starts dating Hugh Hefner. And, she became one of the girlfriends. And there was Mandy, Sandy, and Brandy. She was the year 2000. She was the playmate. Anyway, she gets us into all the Playboy Mansion parties for a year straight. I mean, it's like we're famous there, and it's awesome. And she was our roommate. We had a real good friend called Paul. And Paul was an ecstasy dealer, and that's when I really got into ecstasy. And man, I love that. I love that stuff more than ever. I would rather do that than drinking. So I tried doing that every single night, and it got to the point where I was doing that too much. But the next day I was still kind of buzzed, and I could go into work, and I was a salesman at a guitar shop, and I'd just do fine there. So. But my drinking really kind of picked up, and, those were in my 20s. I was about 24 then. So, it really picked up. I was drinking every night, never drinking during the day. So I was never an alcoholic, even though we'd take lunches and I'd go drink during the day. I was still never an alcoholic. Right. But, I was drinking every single night, going out every night, getting a little sleep, and just never really thought about it. I'd wake up a little bit hungover, but in your 20s, you don't really wake up hungover, at least from, my recollection. So, but yeah, so, it was just a thing where I really found drugs to be, what I wanted to do. I'd never done heroin. I'd never done meth. Right back then it was called speed, and, it was a long time ago, but I met this girl out there that worked in the guitar shop, and, she's a girl that right when I saw her at the very beginning, I worked at the shop for like 4 years, but, when she's the girl that I've just fell in love with her the first time I ever saw her. She wouldn't give me the time of day or anything. Well, she ended up moving somewhere, and I kept some of her stuff because I wanted to talk to her again. So I kept some of her stuff, so she'd have to call me back in order to get it. So she did call me back, and I went and picked her up. And, most girls back then in Los Angeles, they love drugs. So I introduced her to some ecstasy, and we went out one night. Long story short on that, we ended up, hooking up and stayed together for like a year and a half. By that time, we had stopped getting invited to the Playboy Mansion. I think it was probably because I would get drunk and I'd black out, and I don't remember some of the stuff I was saying and some of the stuff I did, but apparently I was a real asshole. And, you don't want to enter those parties as a real asshole, because you go in, they think you're somebody. They think that you're famous just like they are, that you're in the industry just like they are. And, I got guys like Bill Maher high, had really cool conversations, with a lot of the famous people, and just everyone was there, went to, the pajama party or midnight summer's eve. And, that's where some, great things went down. Great things went down in the Prado at night. I was always too sloshed, and I was too, slurring my words and falling all over myself to really, jump in that endeavor. But, we did, we hooked up with several girls there, and it was a lot of fun, man. But, so we stopped getting invited to the Playboy Mansion. I figured, well, I don't think I'm going to top that out here in LA. 4 years had passed since I was out in LA. So I figured, I got this girl, I'm going to move her back. I'm going to go back to college, and I'm going to get my life straight. Right. So I moved back here, and went back to college. I moved her back here, moved her sister back here. Well, shortly thereafter, we had split up, and my drinking, got to like really crazy levels. I was working at that guitar store over here. It was everyone's heard of it. It's Guitar Center. I was out in the Hollywood store, and then I came to the Marietta store, and when I got there, it was something that I did for years. I got transferred down to the Miami store in Kendall, and I figured, oh man, great. I can run away from this thing too. I can run away from alcohol too. And I can just, do a relocation. And, when I get there, I'm going to be okay. And I'm not going to have to drink, because this is a brand new life again. Just like when I moved out to LA to get away from cocaine, it's a brand new life, man. That doesn't last more than a couple days for me, because I did that, a lot. I did that a ton. I moved to 8 different places and always moved back after those. And each different place, I figured I was going to run away from myself, and ended up following myself always there. It would take just a couple days, and I'd be like, man, a drink really sounds good, or a drug really sounds good. And I always thought I was changing my mind. And of course, it was one of those things where it was like, I'm just going to do one just for tonight. It's not going to hurt me. It's never going to hurt me. So there was that. And when I was in the guitar store, one of my old guitar players that from a band back in college came in, and his buddy was buying a guitar. Well, they started beating me up on price, a pretty good bit. They were haggling with me, and I was like, no, you can't have that price. This is the price. And he was like, you know what, you're pretty good at negotiating. He goes, why don't you come in and apply for a job? I work at a mortgage company. And I was like, well, yeah, okay, what's a mortgage? I had no idea what a mortgage was. Well, the next day I went there, applied for it, got the job, and I've been a mortgage broker ever since. So it's just crazy how that worked out. I dropped out of school again because I didn't need that. I just gotten a new job, a new job and a new career, everything like that. It was really cool. And they drank like I did. And they did cocaine like I did. They did ecstasy like I did. They did all the stuff like I did. And it was, one of those things where, just for tonight, I'll go out and, we'll just do it. We'll just do it for tonight. I'm going to get my, now that I have a new job, I'm going to get my perspective back, and I'm going to go ahead and change. And this is where, I kept trying to like reinvent myself and change myself, getting a new job, getting a new girlfriend, getting a new car, always trying to run away from myself, man. That was kind of the theme of my life.
Yeah. We called you were like the king of geographic, Scott. I was just thinking that. I was like, man, 8 times he pulled the geographic. I love it.
I sure did.
We do that. We and no matter where we go, there we are. So what was like the lowest point of your addiction?
Lowest point of my addiction, we after the stint at or the mortgage thing, I owned my own company for a couple years, and drinking got really bad then, because I was making a lot of money. I decided, they were pulling fraud. They were doing a bunch of stuff. So the drinking really progressed worse. I got my first DUI then, and that's when I started getting consequences. I moved up to North Georgia mountains to hit a reset, and I, branched away from them. They were doing real fraud stuff like forging W-2s, and, this was in the refi boom, and, everything was really popping. But, I ended up getting to North Georgia and playing a lot of World of Warcraft, and not really working. But, I had my own company. I considered myself self-employed. So I was a big shot, right? So I did a lot of drinking, and there I was drinking through the day, and there I was drinking through the night. And it really progressed. I wasn't doing too many drugs, but I thought that, geographical up there would really change it. I got another DUI when I was up in North Georgia. So about 6 years after the first one, and had to go to jail for that. So that's when the consequences really started. My first stint in AA was there, and that was, I think, 2010 or something, like 2009, something like that. So I decided to move back, after about a year and a half, and do another geographical, and, kind of come back, maybe go to school again. Who knows, just kind of come back and really do this thing sober. The housing market had crashed by then. It was terrible. And, the only thing left to do is just get loaded, and who knows where I'm going to work. I don't know, so kind of got to that point. But, where it really progressed was several years down the road. Where I really started, I guess, getting the consequences is when, I went to where I got a couple jobs in the mortgage industry and really started doing well, got into management. I worked for a company that promoted me to a branch manager in Pittsburgh. And there I was doing a lot of drugs. I got into a lot of, I got into a lot of prostitutes and, just really kind of started falling. I mean, I was doing really well. And, the drinking just progressed to, the point where I was getting sloshed every single night. And that's really when it started falling. From there, I came back to Atlanta to reset my life again and, started working for a really good company that it didn't take long. It took like 4 months because I had gotten into opiates by that time. And they sent me to a rehab in 2014. And that's where it really started because I got into opiates and, started doing heroin, started doing pills. And that's the stuff that really kind of, grabs onto you. And that's really hard to get away from. Did another geographical to Jacksonville, Florida, and promoted as a branch manager there. And then, that wasn't it. So I had to come back here and, it was just a whole series of moving around and resetting myself. I always needed that reset button. The reset button was big for me. And I didn't see all the, ones I had done previous. I just saw those. Where it really started getting bad really was, towards, I think it was around when I really started, when I tried meth, because then I was doing meth and heroin. And, that's when it really started getting to a point where, it was kind of questionable and, around, I don't know, 2018, 2019, something like that, 2017. By 2019, I was a full-blown addict, full-blown, meth user. I was using it, I was shooting it up. And, I had no job from 2019 to 2020, 2022 rather. And during those 3 years, I would just go and I'd find odd jobs and stuff like that. And I never really saw that, my bottom was a bottom. By that time, I'd been in and out of AA for a couple of years, maybe like 3 years or something like that. But, really got into it and, I was still in the mortgage business, but I was taking a life break. That's what I called it, to justify it with myself. It was one of those life breaks. So I just need a break from, mortgages. I need a break from really everything. I ended up selling all my stuff at one point in time, like an idiot. And I had some good stuff, but I mean, I needed a reset there too. So, I guess just, yeah, go ahead.
I was just thinking like once you start doing like, the meth, the opiates, and this seems like, it's a quicker direction to the bottom, I guess, is because it's, when you get into heroin and it sounds like that's kind of what started pushing you really, really down to the bottom.
Yeah. Yep. And I was shooting meth and it was just a really dark time in my life. And, I started trying to get into AA, got a sponsor, from a guy that said, basically when I was at one of the mortgage companies, he was like, listen, man, you see that guy up there? That's your sponsor. So he pointed me up to the leader of that group. And that guy was my sponsor for the next 10 years. But, I was never sober more than 90 days for the next 10 years. I mean, I was one of those guys that would come in and they'd get 30, 60 days. And man, I have that reset. I'm done, man. I figured it out. All right, good. I see how this thing works. I see how people are getting sober. They just stop drinking for a while and their lives get better. I can see it all over the place. I just need another reset. So I'd leave, go out, be out there for, another month or 2, 3 months and just completely wreck my life, roll it down a hill and just burn it to the ground. And then come back for, I was real serious about it. Yeah, let's do this. Let's work the steps. I'm going to be, I'm absolutely 100% on this. Let's do this thing. And then I'd start getting my life back. And then things were, starting to happen again. I'd get the girl, I'd get the car, I'd get the new job. I successfully hit that reset button. Man, now I'm good. So I'd quit going to AA. I'd turn, to the meth again. And the time span between each one of these kept getting shorter. What I mean by that is the time span of these, kind of outings, so to speak, or, time away from AA kept getting shorter and shorter. And I was progressing to the same place that I was when I left the last time. But I always thought I was making a decision that, this is just what I'm going to do today, man. And I have this thing figured out. This is not that hard, because I started getting better, and I got better quick, and I got my stuff back really quick. So, I never really had, I was definitely not one of those guys that's a white chip wonder, or one chip wonder, or whatever they call it, one white chip, basically. I've collected well over 150 white chips in my outings, and, things like that. For the last year before I got sober, I remember it was 2022. For the entire year, I was relapsing every 3 to 7 days for a year, man. And I just quit picking up white chips. I thought that, they wouldn't, part of it was, okay, well, they're not going to tell that I relapsed this time. And I tell my sponsor, well, yeah, this is my day, and this is what I'm going to do. And I remember looking at my calendar after I got sober for a while, and I pulled it up and I put day, and I just typed in day, and it said day one, probably about, I don't know, 13 different times. Day one, it said day one real, day one that Shires knows about, and day one that everyone thinks that knows about, because I'd keep lying about my day ones and my sobriety date because I relapsed so many times. And I just couldn't get it, man. I couldn't get it. I even tried working the steps. I'd work a couple steps, then I'd fall off again. My sponsor always said I had to hit my knees. I had to go to meetings. I had to call 3 guys a day. I had to work the steps, and, just a list of things. And each time that I came back, I would just do like one more of those and one more of those. I was never truly willing, man. I was just never really jumping into it. One of the guys told me once, my sponsor today told me once that I'm the most stubborn person he's ever met. And man, I thought that was pretty damn cool. I was like, man, that's great. I appreciate that. I really appreciate that. And that's not a good thing, being the most stubborn guy that he ever met. So
I was just wondering, how did you find that willingness? Because you mentioned willingness. What was the moment, like the turning point, where you found that willingness?
Turning point was February 27th. After I'd been relapsing so many times, I just woke up and I said, you know what, it's time to get honest. And right when I did that, I kind of, raised myself out of bed, and right then I knew. I mean, it was absolutely apparent to me what was going on, and what the reason was that I kept getting fucked up, and that I kept relapsing, because what I was doing was I was treating, some people really bad, and it was really hurting them. And it finally came to a realization where I was at my bottom, and I knew what it was. And I probably cried for like 3 hours, and I just realized what a real piece of shit I was, man. It was that, you hit that moment, you hit that bottom where it's just like, man, it's unquestionable. When you've got to take responsibility for where you're at, all the shit that's happened, all the stuff that, poor me, and, where you really see it and you stare it in the face. And that's really what happened. And, that happened, like I said, February 27th of 2023, and I haven't had a drink since that day. But that's, that is when I also became really willing. I jumped into this thing. I worked the steps again. I called my sponsor every day. I went to meetings every day. I hit my knees every day. I do a lot of praying. I hit my knees at night. I do everything that was asked of me because I was scared as shit, because I kept relapsing. I was, at that point in time, I was like, well, if this thing doesn't work for me, I'm fucking dead. I'm done. This is the last house on the block, and it got really scary. And that's really what happened. But the problem was I never drank around the clock. I never lived, under a bridge. I didn't have shakes in the morning. I only drank at night. Yeah, I had 2 DUIs, and I love to drink, but I don't know, man. It's just, I always had a good job. So there were too many good things that were happening until they didn't, until that last 2 years where it was really dark. And, it was at that point and came to a head where I had to work the steps, man, where I had to jump in this thing and take every single suggestion he gave me, I took, because I was scared as shit I was going to relapse. Then I got 90 days, and a lot of people were really proud of me. In fact, one of the guys in my meeting said, man, if you get 6 months, because you're not going to get it. I know you're not going to get it, but if you get 6 months, I'll give you $100. We're going to take a bet. And so I was like, okay, all right, fucker. Yeah, we're going to take that bet. I'm not losing $100, and I'm not going to lose that bet. And fuck you for, even saying that, got a little offended, got my butt hurt a little bit. But I took that bet and I made it 6 months. And when I made it 6 months, he goes, all right, the next bet's for 2 years. I'll give you 500. And I said, hell no, man. There's no way. That scared the shit out of me, Staying sober scared the shit out of me because I didn't know what was going to happen. And, if I ever went to a wedding or if I ever went to, an event, if I ever had to meet up with realtors and they were drinking, it's real scary when you look at, down the barrel of sobriety and you're going to make that choice of, oh my God, am I going to stop forever? And I could never stop forever. I could never do it. I'm a one day at a time guy. And, one day at a time is how I actually got into this thing. And it's how I'm still alive. I'm not a guy that, like I said, I'm not a guy that just a couple white chips, man. I got a ton of them. But I kept coming back. So when I kept coming back, it finally clicked. And, it was a long road. It was a long, heavy road. But, when I made a decision, and God helped me make that decision, my understanding, my higher power, I'll say, my higher power helped me to make that decision. And, when I did, that's when things really changed. That's when I learned about the disease, because I hadn't, even though I'd gone through the big book a couple times, I finally read that, the two parts of this disease, when I start, I can't stop. And when I stop, I can't stay stopped because of the restless irritability and discontent that I feel and this uncomfortableness that I've always felt, that I always wanted to get drugs and alcohol to, to help me relax, release the pressure valve. And that's something I was so accustomed to. I was accustomed to it for 33, 34 years, but once I realized that, I was really hurting people, then, I'd really hurt myself. And I finally found that, oh my God, I put myself in this position and there's really no one else to blame. And holy shit, that's a real freaking, eye opener when you get to that place. So, you know what I mean? Yeah. So ever since then, God, AA has done so much for me. I had to learn to take suggestions from others. I had to stop playing God because I was playing God the whole time. I had to jump in the middle of this AA thing. Had to get myself to a higher power, my understanding, because for a long time, it was a step 2 thing where I didn't think that, I always believed in something, but I didn't think, something would, majestic is going to be able to, take away this craving and this desire and this obsession. And, when I learned about the obsession and when I just said shit, when I just shut the hell up and when I just worked the steps and made, took all the suggestions, I had to jump in the middle of this thing, So
what I love you, not that you had to relapse, Scott, but I love that you did relapse and a lot, but you kept coming back and you kept, there was something there you wanted. You might not have been able to get it, but there was something there that kept you. I was a multiple relapser. I hated calling them relapses, by the way. I always called it default mode because that was my default mode. You know, I mean, so what are some of the good things that have happened to you since you've been sober? I know.
Oh man, well, just the fact that I don't have to rely on chemicals. I've got Serenity now. I've got great friends in AA that'll do anything for me. I don't have to hit a reset button anymore. I've learned that I can really handle any situations because a lot of things happen, and even in sobriety where, they're motherfuckers, and I look forward to what's next, but some things that have happened really, I've got my own house now. I've got a fiance. I've got a great job. And this is only in, 2 years, 4 months. I mean, I'm completely transformed, man. Absolutely 100% a different person. And I couldn't be happier. And all those things that I feared, about sobriety just happen to be things that I made up in my mind, or things that I made up, that are in my mind, that were in my mind of, what this is going to look like. I had no idea of what it's going to look like. It was always terrifying to me to stop. And I just couldn't, what kept me coming back, I guess, were just the periods of sobriety that I had, and just looking back at them and realizing, holy shit, man, I was really happy then. So, but I have a lot of stuff now. I mean, in terms of Serenity, I've got a lot of really good friends. I've just got so much, man. My life is so full. It's such an awesome thing, man. It really is. I've got sponsees. I take meetings to, a place called, well, it doesn't matter what it's called. It's a halfway house, and I take meetings into there. I've got a ton of sponsees that I take through the steps all in a group setting. And I've done that like 5 times. I've done, a lot of 5th steps. I've done a lot of, just taking guys through the book. And man, I'll tell you, each time I leave that place, I never, completely want to go there, because I'm like, man, it's on a Sunday. I'd rather be barbecuing. I'd rather be lazy. It's an hour away, but every time I left there, man, I always had the best feeling in the world. And I think that was from, my higher power, and, just him showing me how beautiful this thing really can get. And that's the thing. And one thing that I will say is I never relapsed. I relapsed after every single step, just about. I relapsed that much. But I never relapsed after step 12. And working with others, that's something that keeps me sober, to this day. So absolutely.
That's pretty cool. What would you say to someone who might be listening and who's feeling hopeless right now about their addiction?
I would say keep coming back, just like they say. I would say take it one day at a time. I would say this thing is an ass kicker, and it's been kicking your ass for a long time. So you're not just going to jump out of it. You've got to keep coming back, and you've got to pray like hell. Well, at least I did. I had to pray like hell. I had to take a lot of suggestions, and I just had to do things that I didn't want to do, and I had to surrender. I think that's the biggest word here, is surrender. I just had to surrender and do it. Take suggestions, even though I didn't like it, because I always thought I was the main guy in my life. I always made the decisions, but I had to take suggestions, because the suggestions people give you in AA are very higher power oriented. They're very God oriented. And it's almost like my higher power is talking to me through people. And it took me a long time to realize that these people really give a shit, that these people really care, So I would say just keep coming back and keep trying it, man. No matter how many times you fall, I promise you're probably not going to get as many white chips as me, and you're probably not going to relapse as much as me. I swear to you, because I did this thing for a long, long time, and I fell a lot of times. But I always kept coming back, and I always tried it again. And finally it clicked.
We fall down, we get up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So is there anything we didn't talk about that you wanted to share?
God, not that I can think of. Just, I really wish that I could, emphasize how great my life is now. And just the turning point. I did talk a lot about, what happened, or excuse me, about, how it was. Yeah. And, I really wish I could emphasize just how great my life looks now. And I take a lot of stuff for granted. Because once I hit that point where I start getting stuff, I'm like, oh, okay, well, what's next? And, that drug of more, I always wanted more drugs. I always wanted more alcohol. I still have that disease of more, because once I start making money, man, I want more. Once I start getting good things in my life, I want more. Once I get a pretty cool car, you know what, man, that's not a cool enough car. I want, more. And that thing's still in my life. And it's something that I have to, that's something I have to turn over to my higher power, quite a good bit. So, I mean, by no means is this something you can just, hit a button and you're okay. No, it's going to be a lifelong journey. And I'm just going to have to, it's like a step 6 and step 7 problem. When problems arise, I've got to be like, okay, man, I'm powerless over this. I really want this defect gone, and God, please help me just take it, and turning it over to God, and thy will be done and not mine. And, really, I guess my relationship with God is something I didn't really hit on, because I firmly believe, and you can't convince me otherwise, that there is an absolute higher power directing things. I see it every day. It's absolutely amazing.
I think you're living proof, Scott.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
A friend of mine always says is, because you said it really is a disease of more, and I certainly agree with that. And he said, he said he has something that most people don't have. He says, I have enough, and I'm like, damn, I want to have enough,
Yeah, that's great.
I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet.
I'm not even close to there. I wish I was. Sometimes I can feel the serenity of, okay, I'm there, but man, that stops after a couple hours, man. So,
yeah, I'm definitely not there yet, but something to strive for. But man, I really appreciate you taking the time. But I can't let you go without doing our rapid fire questions, sir.
All right.
So, no
Sounds
pressure,
good.
Scott. No pressure.
No pressure at all. All right, here we go.
All right, man. What is your favorite recovery slogan?
I would say keep coming back. Absolutely. One day at a time and keep coming back. Because I had to keep coming back for a long time, and I failed a lot of times. And if I would have stopped coming back, I would be dead. There's no question about it. So, yeah.
What is your least favorite recovery slogan?
Oh, man. God, that's a good one. There's so many that are just kind of live and let live, I think, would probably be my least favorite. I mean, what does that even mean? That's like, come on, dude. Live and let live. Well, yeah, of course I'm going to live. Let live. No, man, I still want to control people, man. I still want to control everything that's going around me. I'm not going to let live. Yeah. So, yeah, that's a tough one. That's challenging for me.
I get it. What do you think is your sobriety superpower?
I would say my connection with the higher power, my connection with God. Because when I firmly rely on, my higher power and my God, things just work out, man. Things that I never thought would. All my fears, my financial fears, things, that I don't know if it's going to happen because it's not happening quick enough. It's not happening on my timetable. It never is. And I just have to turn it over. And when I turn it over, I think, that's where the magic comes. And, my higher power is absolutely, my biggest asset, without question.
If you could say one thing to your former self, what would it be?
Oh man, do this sooner. What the hell are you doing? Keep going in now, man. What are you doing moving around? Jesus, dude. Just jump in the middle of this thing. Surrender. Be done with it. I wish I would have, I wish I would have gotten to that point a lot earlier, because I didn't know how good this thing could get. I really had no idea. And the more I'm sober, the better it gets, man. And I just live a life that I wouldn't have been able to fathom it. No way. I guess that point where I was in middle school that I was talking about earlier, always wanting to get back to that, man. It's 100 times better than that.
You didn't peak in middle school, Scott.
I didn't peak in middle school. I'm starting to learn that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny as hell.
So, what song do you play to lift your spirits when you need a boost?
Oh, man. I'm a big fan of Social Distortion. And I think Ring of Fire is one of those songs that really gets me amped up. The thing is, I listen to a lot of radio stations that, don't play Social Distortion. And when I hear social distortion, I firmly believe that's God talking to me and saying, hey, man, I'm here. Every time I hear it, because they don't play it. They never play social distortion. And I think really any one of those songs can get me amped up without question.
You've given me something to look up. If you could grant yourself one wish to help with your recovery, what would it be?
To not want that, that disease of more, to be, I just guess serene all the time and not have to do a step 6 and 7, all the time.
What step do you love the most?
Step 12. Yeah, because it's the only step that I haven't relapsed after. And, I get so much joy from it. I love talking to my sponsees because, I'm having the worst day and I'm all in self and self-pity and a bunch of bullshit until they call. And then I hear, a lot of them are at the halfway house. They're at the halfway house, and man, I look at their life and I look at mine, how different it is. And it gets me way out of my own way and just out of my own head. And when I get off the phone, I realize that, holy shit, I don't even remember what I was thinking about. So step 12, without question, man, helping others. Done more for me than anything.
Yeah, I love it. What step do you love the least?
I would say step 1. I don't want to admit I'm powerless, man. I like thinking that I have power. I like thinking that I'm in charge sometimes. I like thinking that, and I've always liked thinking that, man, I carve out my own life. I'm not going to let any person or, anyone tell me who I am or what to do. And I'm not going to follow, society or anything like that because I'm a rebel. You know what I mean? So being powerless, you're basically giving all that shit up and you're saying, oh, dude, who cares? It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. You just try a new way of life. And I am powerless. I am powerless over a lot of different things. I'm powerless over my emotions. A lot of times I'm powerless over my thoughts. And, powerlessness is something I still struggle with a lot of times. And that's when, I have to turn it back over to God. And, people that say that they've worked the steps are full of shit because you never have worked the steps. You work the steps. I mean, at least I do. I work the steps all the time, all the damn time. And it's something I'll continue to work. So yeah, I work the steps. I haven't worked them. You know what I mean?
What is one of your favorite movies?
Fight Club. I love that movie. That's absolutely my favorite. I've seen that movie over 100 times. Well, I don't know if that many times. Definitely over 50 though. I love it. And I think more or less because it's that that chaos aspect of it, and it's like dual personality, thing where, he's created this. It's just a great movie. I don't want to ruin it for anyone, but that's probably the best movie I think that I've ever witnessed. Hell yeah.
I get it. And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You're finally here, Scott. We've been waiting for you.
I love it. I love it. Well, I'm glad you were finally on the Cup of Joe show, Scott. I really appreciate you sharing your experience, strength, and hope, man.
Yeah, that was fun, man. I appreciate you inviting me. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Hey, everybody, please subscribe to our friends at thedailyponderables.com, your recovery source for inspiration and encouragement every day. A new episode of the Cup of Joe show is released every Thursday at noon. You can visit thecupofjoeshow.net, or you can listen to the show in your favorite podcast apps, Podbean, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and others. Just search for The Cup of Joe Show. Don't forget the "the." Like, follow, subscribe, and share because someone out there needs to hear this today. Have a great day, everybody.
It's just a laid-back vibe, baby.
We hope you enjoyed today's experience, strength, and hope. We are so grateful you decided to join us. Please share this episode with someone who might need it. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Remember, no matter where you are in your recovery journey, you are not alone. Reach up and reach out to someone. Please do not suffer in silence. Until next time, let's take it 1 minute, 1 hour, and 1 day at a time. Thanks for listening to the Cup of Joe Show.